Hello again everyone, I'm Daniel the Cross-Cultural Nerd, here with another video for you today. This time we're talking about something not quite so positive. Lately, I've been hearing of a disturbing trend among some on the political far right, on the far fringe even by today's standards, a resurgence in criticizing the legality and or morality of interracial marriage. Normally, I try to keep my channel politically and religiously neutral. But something like this justifies breaking my neutrality from time to time. A little bit of background on myself here. I grew up in one of the most racially diverse towns in Kentucky, and I went to a Christian university in Tennessee with an extremely active community of minorities and international students. One thing that my parents, my teachers, many Christian pastors with whom I've spoken, and my experiences in general have taught me was a disdain for racism. To this day, in equal measure, I am both saddened and enraged when I see people claiming to be Christian spouting vitriol against people of different skin colors, especially when the vitriolic ones are white, which unfortunately seems to be most of the time, since we have had some awful history with white supremacy. My wife is a Chinese national who grew up right here in Luoyang, and we met in church at the start of my second year in China. Not to mention, I have many friends who are interracial themselves, or who married outside their skin color and or nationality. So, such venom directed at interracial marriage makes me very angry for my wife and for my friends as well. Criticizing interracial dating and marriage on biblical grounds is sadly nothing particularly new. Bible verses were twisted to justify slavery and segregation years ago, and were still twisted to justify anti-miscegenation in more recent times. My own home state of Kentucky, regrettably, was one of the several states that continued to ban interracial marriage until 1967, when Loving versus Virginia struck down the ban as unconstitutional. The trial judge who initially heard the case justified his barring Mildred Jeter and Richard Loving from Virginia for 25 years under pain of a year in jail by saying, quote, "Almighty God created the races white, black, yellow, Malay, and red, and he placed them on separate continents. And but for the interference with his arrangement, there would be no cause for such marriages. The fact that he separated the races shows that he did not intend for the races to mix." End quote. Bob Jones University, a staunchly conservative university in South Carolina that makes Christian textbooks for schools across the U.S., lost its non-profit tax-exempt status in 1976 for discriminating against black people, at first by barring them from attending at all, and finally up to allowing them to attend but banning interracial dating. The decision was upheld by the Supreme Court in Bob Jones University versus the United States in 1983. Bob Jones would continue its interracial dating ban until the year 2000, and they got tax-exempt status again in 2017. More recently, in 2019, the owner of Boone's Camp Event Hall in Booneville, Mississippi, refused to host the wedding of an interracial couple who were also Christian because of that owner's own Christian beliefs. Now, the owner did post and, unfortunately, delete an apology on Facebook in which she talked about meeting with her pastor and discovering the Bible actually does not condemn interracial marriage like she grew up being told. Now, side note here, I don't know who her pastor was, but that pastor's got all my respect. Hopefully, this owner changed her attitude as a result. More disturbing, however, is certain posts on Twitter by Stephen Wolfe. In these posts, he said the following, quote, "If they didn't separate and they married each other, then nations, people, ethne would cease to exist. It would turn into a mass monoculture. But we are drawn to similarity, as Aquinas said, which is therefore part of our nature and also part of our good. And thus, while intermarriage is not itself wrong as an individual matter, groups have a collective duty to be separate and marry among themselves." End quote. Replying to another, he went on to add, quote, "There is a difference between something being sinful, absolutely, and something being sinful relatively. Inter-ethnic marriage can be sinful relatively, but not absolutely." End quote. Whatever that means. I'll show you later how it's not sinful at all, but Wolfe has a sadly growing following and is also the author of the book The Case for Christian Nationalism, and some in the Christian nationalist movement have their own gripes about interracial marriage. Sociologist Samuel Perry has been part of a team studying the rise of Christian nationalism since the New Tens. In an interview with the Christian website Church Leaders, he said the following, quote, Stephen Wolf's comments are really the logical extension of white Christian nationalist logic and really all ethno-nationalist logic. Wolf explains it clearly in his tweets. If groups or nations are called to be separate, intermarriage violates that distinctiveness and produces a monoculture. Thus, while interethnic marriage may not be a sinful thing individually, it's still a kind of sin in that you are neglecting the obligation to stay separate and marry your own kind. We found that the higher white Americans score on our indicators of Christian nationalism, the more uncomfortable they were with the idea of their children marrying blacks, Asians, or Latinos. Well, one shouldn't take the resurgence of such thinking lying down. In the next several minutes, I want to first examine and refute the ways racists have historically used the Bible to demean other skin colors and ethnic groups, and then point out specific scripture verses that refute the very idea of forbidding interracial marriage. As the vast majority of these people are some form of Protestant, I will be restricting my own sources exclusively to the Old and New Testaments of the Bible, excluding the Apocrypha and any holy texts used by Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, and others that have been accused of being cults. And because some of these people are finicky about certain translations, I will solely use the King James Version for any verses I read aloud or otherwise post for the viewers to see. Many apologies to those people who prefer that their English be from within the last 4 centuries. But in the meantime, let's get going. Now, one of the most cited justifications for racism against black people in particular was the so-called curse of Ham. No, this has nothing to do with pork. Most people know the story of Noah, the one where God punished the evil human race with a worldwide flood, and Noah and his family were the only humans spared in an ark made to God's specifications. Conservative young earth creationist group Answers in Genesis, who I should also point out vehemently opposes racism themselves, even went so far as to make a theme park of it. In Genesis 9, from verse 18 to the end, there is an incident that happened after everyone left the ark. From the King James Version, verse 18, And the sons of Noah that went forth of the ark were Shem, and Ham, and Japheth. And Ham is the father of Canaan. These are the 3 sons of Noah, and of them was the whole earth overspread. And Noah began to be a husbandman, and he planted a vineyard. And he drank of the wine, and was drunken, and he was uncovered within his tent. And Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father, and told his 2 brethren without. And Shem and Japheth took a garment, and laid it upon both their shoulders, and went backward, and covered the nakedness of their father. And their faces were backward, and they saw not their father's nakedness. And Noah awoke from his wine, and knew what his younger son had done unto him. And he said, Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants shall he be unto his brethren. And he said, Blessed be the Lord God of Shem, and Canaan shall be his servant. God shall enlarge Japheth, and he shall dwell in the tents of Shem, and Canaan shall be his servant. Now, you note that servant of servants has often been worded as slave in other translations. First off, it was Canaan, the son of Ham, and not Ham himself, who is the object of the curse. Secondly, if you go to the very next chapter, chapter 10, you'll see that Ham's sons were Canaan, Egypt, Put, and Cush. These also match the names of geographical places, and all but Canaan were in Africa. This was used to say, hey, Ham and his descendants were cursed to be slaves, and Ham was the ancestor of black people, so that means we can have black slaves. No. Remember, per the text, only Canaan was cursed, and Canaan was the only one who didn't settle in Africa. This just goes to show you, even centuries ago, many white Americans were crap at geography, and some people don't let a little thing like facts get in the way of their favorite lies. Now, another verse used to justify slavery was in the New Testament, in the book of Ephesians, chapter 6, verses 5 through 8. From the King James Version, Servants, this is verse 5, Servants, be obedient to them that are your masters according to the flesh, with fear and trembling and singleness of your heart as unto Christ. Verse 6, Not with eye service as men pleasers, but as the servants of Christ, doing the will of God from the heart. Verse 7, With good will, doing service as to the Lord and not to men. 8, Knowing that whatsoever good thing any man doeth, the same shall he receive of the Lord, whether he be bond or free. Note that In many other translations, servants was translated as slaves. Now, first point here, many biblical scholars have deemed this to refer less to chattel slavery, that is, the permanent ownership of a human being, and more to the household slaves of the cities of the Roman Empire. Now, in the empire, these slaves could save money and possibly even buy their own freedom. And that is if they weren't freed by their masters outright. And if they were freed after the age of 30, their masters had to give them legal and financial help. Now, I'm not condoning ancient slavery or any slavery at all by any stretch, but those conditions were a pipe dream to what many American minorities had for quite a long time in the U.S. Now, a lot of people back then probably didn't know the social norms of first century Roman Empire, but this brings us to point number 2. Those same white people who were trying to enforce this completely ignore the part right after. Verse 9, "And ye masters, do the same things unto them, forbearing threatening, knowing that your master also is in heaven, neither is there respect of persons with him." As you can see, the book of Ephesians ordered masters to treat their servants and slaves with the same respect. Because, to God, if both master and slave are Christian, then God is the ultimate authority to both, and when both are dead, they're not going to have those past occupations. And still, you had some other people claim that when God marked Adam's firstborn son Cain to protect him from retribution for killing his brother Abel, that mark was black skin. And still others claimed there were other people somehow before Adam, and the story from Adam through the flood was all about white people. But this falls flat as well, since according to a literal interpretation, as some racists like to claim to follow, keyword being claim, everyone except Noah's family died in the flood and we still have black people today. Now, we're going to go to verses specifically used by racists to support the claim that different skin colors and ethnicities should not intermarry. Now, to be honest, there are several in the Old Testament warning the Israelites not to intermarry with the Canaanites, but this was not because of race or ethnicity, it was because of religion. Most of the surrounding people groups didn't worship Yahweh, and the concern was that by intermarrying with them, they would be led away from Yahweh. In Genesis 24, Abraham told his servant to find a wife for his son Isaac, specifically not from the Canaanites. In Deuteronomy 7, the Israelites were told to destroy these other peoples rather than intermarry with them. Although the morality of ancient era genocide is another can of worms that we're not going to be discussing in a talk about interracial marriage. That chapter, along with Joshua 23, warned that if they did intermarry, they'd face the judgment of God. Judges 3 and several other chapters mention the Israelites' subjugation being partly due to their intermarriage with the surrounding locals. Ezra chapter 9 says the Israelites would be blessed and prosperous if they didn't intermarry with the locals. In 1 Kings 11, it was said that King Solomon, who had previously been abundantly blessed, took 700 wives and 300 concubines, mostly foreign, and was led away from God through them. Not to mention that was way too many marriages to deal with. And in Nehemiah 13, Solomon was used as an object lesson in why the Israelites, newly returned from Babylon, should not intermarry with the locals. But I absolutely cannot overstate this. This was not out of concerns for ethnicity or culture, but out of concerns over religion. Let's look at some of the interracial marriages in the Bible that were blessed, or at least not punished or disdained by God and prophets. If we're talking about marriages in which the spouses were likely to have different skin colors, there are at minimum 6 such marriages in the Bible. Joseph, Jacob's son, made famous for his multicolored robe and interpretations of dreams, married Asenath, daughter of an Egyptian priest. She may very well have been a darker brown than Joseph, because he was a Hebrew and she was Egyptian. This may even be an exception to the warnings against marrying between religions, because nowhere is it ever stated that Asenath ever converted to Joseph's faith. The second such marriage is Moses and his second wife, an unnamed woman from Cush. Cush was a great kingdom in its own right, taking up what is now Sudan, Ethiopia, and parts of southern Egypt. And if you've ever seen people from those regions, most of them are pretty dark. Later, in 1 Kings chapter 3, Solomon married Pharaoh's daughter as part of a marriage alliance just after becoming king. And this was before God told him in a dream to ask for any blessing he wanted. This may be a second exception to the prohibition on marrying outside one's faith, because it doesn't say that she started following Jehovah either, although Solomon did mess up later, as I have already mentioned previously. And then in Song of Solomon, chapter 1, verses 5 through 6, we have the bride specifically mentioning how dark she is. The King James uses the word black, and in chapter 5, she describes her lover as ruddy. The King James uses the phrase white and ruddy, making the interracial overtones even greater, though many other versions replace white with dazzling, or radiant, or handsome. Either way, ruddy is the most common color-related word in the different versions I found. I looked through almost every version on BibleGateway.com, followed by tan or tanned, though it can be safely inferred that the man and woman are different shades at the very least. At least 2 other Israelite-Egyptian marriages occurred as well. In 1 Chronicles chapter 2, verses 34 through 35, an Egyptian slave named Jarha married the daughter of his Israelite master Sheshan, as Sheshan had no sons. In 1 Chronicles 4:17, another Israelite, Mered, married Bethia, daughter of Pharaoh. Eat your heart out, Joseph. Now, if we're talking about similar color but different ethnocultural groups, we see a bunch more examples. Joseph's brothers, Judah and Simeon, both married Canaanite women, as mentioned in Genesis 38:2 and Exodus 6:15, and Joseph's son Manasseh had an Aramean concubine, according to 1 Chronicles 7, verse 14. Zipporah was Moses' first wife, from Midian, which neighbored Canaan to the south. Jephunneh, father of Caleb, one of the 2 good spies of the 12 that scouted out Canaan, the other one being Joshua, was from a Canaanite tribe called the Kenizzites. Rahab of Jericho was the prostitute who sheltered the Israelite spies in Canaan, and she and her family were spared from the destruction of the city. She would go on to marry Salmon and be one of Jesus' ancestors. Jael, the woman famous for driving a tent peg through Sisera's head during the time of Deborah the judge, was married to a Kenite man named Heber, descended from Jethro of Midian, who was, if you remember, Jethro was Moses' father-in-law. Ruth of Moab has an entire book of the Bible devoted to her, and she had 2 intercultural marriages to Israelites. Her first husband, Chilion, died, but she returned with her mother-in-law Naomi to Bethlehem in Judah, vowing to follow Yahweh, and later married Boaz, son of the aforementioned Salmon and Rahab. She would later become the great-grandmother of King David and an ancestor of Jesus. Now, a fun fact for any idiots still obsessed with blood quotas, Ruth and Boaz's son Obed was 75% Canaanite, making his own marriage one between ethnic groups, which means his son Jesse was 37.5% Canaanite, and King David himself was 18.75% Canaanite. Uriah the Hittite, Zelek the Ammonite, and Igal ben Nathan of Zobah, an Aramean town, were among David's mighty men, as detailed in the end of 1 Samuel 23, so we know they were accepted in Israelite society at least, and Uriah was married to Bathsheba, and was sadly killed by David to take her as his own in one of his lesser moments. So if Zelek and Igal got married as well, then most likely they would have married other Israelites. 1 Chronicles 2:17 said David's own sister Abigail married Jether, an Ishmaelite, the people from whom Arabs are descended, and one of the wives of David himself was Maacah, daughter of the Canaanite king of Geshur. Another example that got its own book is Esther of the tribe of Benjamin, marrying King Ahasuerus of Persia. This was another example of an interethnic and interreligious marriage that God blessed, though there's also the caveat of the king being able to do what he wants and Esther being a member of a subjugated people. Examples in the New Testament are far rarer, but the most prominent is Timothy, son of a Greek father and Jewish mother, who accompanied the Apostle Paul on his missionary journeys and even got 2 books of the Bible of his own in the form of Paul's letters to him. Now let's go back one brief moment to Moses and his Cushite second wife. In the book of Numbers, chapter 12, we have what is by far, in my opinion, the biggest refutation to any use of the Bible to oppose interracial marriage. Reading from the King James Version, we're just going to read all the way through the chapter. And Miriam and Aaron spake against Moses because of the Ethiopian woman whom he had married, for he had married an Ethiopian woman. And they said, Hath the Lord indeed spoken only by Moses? Hath he not spoken also by us? And the Lord heard it. Now the man Moses was very meek, above all the men which were on the face of the earth. And the Lord spake suddenly unto Moses, and unto Aaron, and unto Miriam, Come out, ye 3 unto the tabernacle of the congregation. And they three came out. And the Lord came down in the pillar of the cloud, and stood in the door of the tabernacle, and called Aaron and Miriam, and they both came forth. And he said, Hear now my words. If there be a prophet among you, I, the Lord, will make myself known unto him in a vision, and will speak unto him in a dream. My servant Moses is not so, who is faithful in all mine house. With him will I speak mouth to mouth, even apparently, and not in dark speeches. And the similitude of the Lord shall he behold. Wherefore then were ye not afraid to speak against my servant Moses? And the anger of the Lord was kindled against them, and he departed. And the cloud departed from off the tabernacle, and behold, Miriam became leprous, white as snow. And Aaron looked upon Miriam, and behold, she was leprous. And Aaron said unto Moses, Alas, my Lord, I beseech thee, lay not the sin upon us, wherein we have done foolishly, and wherein we have sinned. Let her not be as one dead, of whom the flesh is half consumed when he cometh out of his mother's womb. And Moses cried unto the Lord, saying, Heal her now, O God, I beseech thee. And the Lord said unto Moses, If her father had but spit in her face, should she not be ashamed 7 days? Let her be shut out from the camp 7 days, and after that let her be received in again. And Miriam was shut out from the camp 7 days, and the people journeyed not until Miriam was brought in again. And afterward the people removed from Hazeroth, and pitched in the wilderness of Paran. You know that your marriage has God's full endorsement when he smites your own family just for criticizing it. Honestly, I think this example is even more damning for the anti-miscegenation argument when people subscribe to the erroneous idea that the protagonists of the Bible were white, because then you have white groom, black bride, endorsed by God, and someone criticizes that and gets struck with leprosy. Now, I know this is a lot, but the point in all of this is this: to provide overwhelming proof that people who claim to be Christians and yet try to use the Bible to justify opposing marriage between different colors, different nationalities, or different ethnicities are actually going against the God of the very Bible they claim to follow. Or, in less religious terms, they're more full of crap than a constipated dung beetle. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. If you have any questions or comments, put them in the comment section down below and I'll get back to you. Check out my link tree in the description, and you can follow me on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Mastodon, Co-host, and Hive. Once again, I'm Daniel, the Cross-Cultural Nerd, and I'll see you again next time. Bye-bye.